Hello and welcome back to the live series podcast brought to you by Amicus. This is the podcast that gives you insight into the life and role of tech leaders from all over the world. Today I'm joined by Sabeen Syed, VP of Engineering over at Ockam. Hi Sabeen, I was going to say hi, but you were already like,
For those who are viewing on video, they can see I was waving. But...
Yeah, for those not viewing on video, Sabeen just waved. Just get some subtitles or something going on down the audio subtitles. How are you doing? You're right.
Good. I'm doing really well. I'm just recovering from the flu. So just FYI for those who might hear me cough a little bit, it is the flu. I do have my tea here with me and let's see how much that will help throughout this conversation.
I know, I'm the same. Like, we are recording this around autumn, kind of getting a little bit cooler in the UK. I don't know I mean, I imagine where you are, it really, is it ever cool?
That's a great question. So I live in Austin, Texas, and finally now it's like end of October, it's gotten a little bit cooler. So like we're in the 70s or the 20s in Celsius. So it's actually pretty nice right now. But yeah, so just thankful for that. Our summer this year was brutal, way too hot and for way too long.
Oh, one of my colleagues, Sam, is just about to relocate on Friday to our Austin branch.
Wow.
And he's like, Heather, I do not know what to pack. I don't know what to wear. What am I traveling? What's the weather going to be like? You know, it's like, it's probably just going to be a bit warmer. Like, you'll be fine.
Yes.
And much cooler culturally, I imagine, than little old England. So anyway, I can't. That's probably the longest I've ever talked about the weather at the beginning of a podcast. That's probably the most British thing I've ever done. So you're over at Ockam, VP of Engineering. Just for those who maybe haven't heard of Ockam, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about what they do, and then obviously a little bit about your role there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, at Ockam, we build developer tools that are in the security space. And our vision is to enable all communication in motion to be trusted slash secured. And basically what that means is that any communication going from one point to another or one application to another, we want that to be secured. And we give developers the tools to be able to do that in a very simple way. And this communication works at the L7 layer. And it's something that can go over any types of transport protocols and over any number of hops. So just really cool stuff. And we actually just released our cloud service and we're beginning to onboard customers. So it's just a really exciting time over at Ockam. And a little bit more about my role. So like Heather said, I'm the VP of Engineering. And how I envision when I think about the role that I have currently at Ockam, and then overall, even in the management of engineering, I think about it in three main buckets. So the first is people, the second is processes, and the third is the product. So on the people side of the house, I like to think about how to build an environment in which the team members are thriving, they're feeling safe, we have good communication, things like that. And then the second processes is building those systems that you need to put in place to help to drive efficiency, bring guardrails in to help folks know how to communicate, things like that, what to use when they communicate. And then the third product is basically helping to develop the vision that we have, and then also creating a strategy around how we want to execute, what we want to execute to, and then actually doing the execution and, meeting OKRs and things like that. So yeah, that's
Love that. I love that. So it's kind of simplistic, but like I guess with how complex your role actually is, it's kind of inspiring to hear it kind of broken down like that off the bat. Because you get some people that'll kind of, they're not too even sure how to answer what it is that they do. Because it is like, especially in engineering, it's such a complex world that you guys are in every single day. Yeah, I love that. Love how you've broken that down. So how where is your team based, and is it remote? Is it all on site? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my team is fully remote, and we are also global. So everyone works from home, and we have folks who are in Europe, we have folks who are in Africa, we have folks who are in North America, of course, and then South America as well. So everybody is, across different time zones. And yeah, so a lot of async communication that needs to happen and things like that. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go forward.
Yeah, we definitely will bounce into that because it's really fascinating. I think you might be the first guest I've had on who has a completely remote team that is that international. You really are spread absolutely everywhere. So let's talk a little about kind of your career up to now, and we can kind of touch on managerial styles and things like that in terms of how you've adapted through your roles and the management style that you've kind of, not created, but kind of has arisen within you, for lack of a better phrase. That was a very dramatic way of saying that, but yeah.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. That's arisen within me. I love it. It's that totally makes sense. So yeah, I would say, so one of the things that has been constant throughout my leadership or management career in terms of style, is the people first aspect. So being people first is super, super important to me. I feel like if you're people first, I feel like everything else kind of takes care of itself. Another style that or kind of a buzzword that is pretty popular is servant leadership. And that's basically the concept of where a leader serves their team and is doing what is needed, for the team and to move things forward, to address concerns, things like that. So I would say that at a high level has been the constant in my management style. But I think that's a really good point where like adapting your style depending on the role or the situation. For me, it's been more of situational adaptation. So an example here is, even with this people first leadership, when I've had like customer issues happen, and let's say a customer is, what we're building, for example, at Ockam, if that goes down in production for a particular customer, that's going to be a huge problem, because then, your traffic that is going across from one place to another is not going to be secure. And that can cause, lots of issues, privacy, security issues there. So we're going to have to act fast. And in those types of situations, trying to be more democratic is not, going to be ideal. You're going to have to make fast decisions, and, probably the all your team members might not agree with the decision, but that's okay. So in that situation, being more authoritative, for me, that has been the case. And, we have an issue with the customer. Okay, we talk to them, figure out a possible solution, and we go ahead and execute towards that. So there's actually, just at kind of a meta, there is an article that's written by Daniel Goleman, and it's in the Harvard Business Review, and it's called Leadership That Gets Results. And he talks about like the different styles of leadership, and there's like authoritative, there's coercive, there's coaching, so on and so forth. There's like 6 of them. And the important thing that he says in that article is that in a leader's career, there's going to be times when they're going to have to use each different style depending on the situation. And I 100% agree. It totally there can be kind of like your underlying theme, but then there's going to be different situations that you're going to have to adapt to. Another one is where on your team, there's going to be conflict between people. So how are you going to handle that? Like, is that going to be something where, you'll be like democratic and, you have to go to each person and try and, get everybody to agree on something? That's not always going to happen. So I feel like then, you have to use the tool of coaching and maybe a little bit of authoritativeness style, and mix those two together to move things forward. Yeah, so that's kind of how I adapt my style in different situations.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because especially, I'm going to try and find a link to that book, by the way, as well. That sounds really informative. But almost being able to be that self-aware and know that you have to adapt different styles could almost be its own style, because you are this self-aware kind of respectful leader who, you could be at any of those things, but I think the ability to be that self-aware with your management is such an important thing. And I think, yeah, like you said, just educating yourself on those different styles is obviously where to start with it, but then applying it and knowing when to adapt, and like you said, an underlying theme is probably what comes naturally to people, but then education and experience and self-awareness, I think, are also things that can benefit too. That was such a good answer. I was so intrigued by what you were saying. I was like, yeah, and you could have this, and then this could happen, and you could become this too. Like, it's wicked. So let's talk about like your team, because obviously you're saying that people first approach is important to you. Presumably that requires a ton of good communication between your team in order to get things done. If you're prioritizing people, a lot of people might see that as not prioritizing projects, but obviously that's not the case.
Right.
How do you implement communication within your team?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I love that. And I feel like it is such a, like, there's so many aspects to that, like, bringing communication, how do you how do you set up the guardrails and things like that? So the first piece for this is, in my, for me, is to model it myself and make sure that I am doing things that are like highly communicative. And then I'm also encouraging like my executive team, or we're all doing that together. And I feel like that really helps to kind of set the tone and set the example, for the company. And a couple of examples here, like specific examples of high communication that I've seen in my past and that I try to do as well. So the first is, at a previous company, our CEO, he used to send out an email to the whole company every week. And this was, at a specific stage of the company that didn't, it lasted for like a year. But within that year, it was so great just to get, it wasn't necessarily, what he's been doing or where the company's at or something like that. It was like different, just, I guess, whatever was top of mind for him that week. And he would send that out as, like, where's the industry going, or what are the changes that he's seeing, or, just kudos to maybe, some particular product had a release and it was a major thing, and, putting it out there. And I thought that was wonderful, and just something that was consistent. And, and everybody would read it. And it was also really like motivating because you're, thinking about, it's kind of like a way of, like the CEO is communicating with you and with everyone. So I thought that was awesome. And I feel like doing things like that is super important. Another one that I really love is once your teams and your organization that you have, once that starts getting really big, it's hard to do like one-on-ones with everybody. I think with your direct reports, of course, that maintaining that is really important. But another thing that can be done is office hours, and having consistent office hours at whatever basis it works for you. But that kind of provides a medium for other people to be able to reach you and, come and join your office hours and, ask you questions or just have like a regular discussion. So yeah, so modeling it myself, I would say, is the first thing. The second thing is what has helped me wherever I go, and assessing it at a regular period of time is really important, but it's kind of figuring out the big chunks of your organization or your organizational work and what are the gaps. And to put that unvaguely is things like planning. What is your planning process? How do you plan? How do you do yearly planning? How do you do quarterly planning? How do you do sprint planning? Like being able to take that big chunk and as and as a leader, like think about what is that process that I have? Let's say like just for quarterly planning, how do we do that? And I feel like it's really important to, first of all, for yourself to think about what's the current situation, and then what would be efficient for your teams and your organizations, within now and the next like 6 months. I feel like thinking beyond that, then you just get into like analysis paralysis. But thinking about it within the next 6 months and what's a good process to put in place. And that's where you can specifically think about the communication practices that you want to put in place. So to kind of continue with the example of quarterly planning, recently this has been something that I've been doing at Ockam to figure out what is that process that we want to put in place. And one of the things or the process that I've been talking about with the team is, so first we have a backlog where we write down like features that we want to work on, and that is a form of communication. Like that's a written area. You're using a tool, people can add to it in an async manner. And then, okay, as you're getting close to the next quarter, maybe like about a month away, you have conversations or you start like a meeting. So you have to, schedule a specific meeting with maybe a subset of folks. You send out an email to your whole organization. Hey, we're starting planning. If there's anything that you feel like is important that, that we should work on, put it up here, things like that. And then building that whole piece out. And that results in like the guardrails of communication, how you're going to have it, what medium you're going to use, so on and so forth, how you're going to collect feedback and so on. So I feel like taking those big chunks and breaking them down is something that really helps for me. And like just to give another example, so outside of like planning, like there's another big one, which is hiring and interviewing. What is that process? What are the communication pieces that we need to put in place for that? And one of the things that I have seen in my experience is that you'll create, like, this is a never ending type of a thing. So it's not like you create a process and, yippee, like that's going to last you a couple of years. I feel like the only thing constant is change. Because as your team grows or your customer base grows or, whatever it is, changes, they continue to evolve the process. Yeah. So that's kind of how I think about communication practices and how I develop them.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that first point about the CEO sticking out those emails. I think I've not actually really heard of that happening like internally before. Like you might get like CEOs posting on LinkedIn or something like that, but thinking about their team and communicating with their team like that and opening a channel almost for a conversation if someone wanted to about something particular that was mentioned or whatever, but also it just humanizes them, and it really brings, it brings you down to, as a leader, down to your team's level, and it kind of diminishes any kind of like abrasiveness when it comes to the hierarchy, I suppose. And I just really love that as well. I really like that you've mentioned that. So how do you, we've talked about communication and how your people first approach is obviously very successful by the sounds of it. It sounds like you're absolutely nailing it, but also how do you then ensure that the collaboration is happening between your team? You can't have your eyes everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
How do you kind of, ensure that things are happening efficiently?
Yeah. And that's hard to gauge. There's no, well, I shouldn't say there's no, but I haven't found like any specific metrics that really tell me, okay, my team is, 100% engaged or whatever, 85% engaged. But there's some things that I keep in mind that help me to be like, yes, like this is good. Like we have our processes that we have in place, or our communication that we have in place, and collaboration, like as you said, is going well. And there's mainly, I would say, three things there as well that I think about. So the first thing that I like to do, and that I'm actually just starting at Ockam, is a team health survey. And how this is measuring collaboration, it's a little bit like indirect. It's more of like a measure of how my team members are doing and feeling about Occam. And basically, this health survey it goes out, or I want it to go out like on like every couple of months, and it has questions around like, how is your workload? Are you feeling like your voice is heard? Do you feel recognized? Do you enjoy, working with your team members? And then it also has like an open space for people to put any feedback anonymously for management, to do. And that team health survey really gives me that understanding about just overall, like, how are people feeling about working here? And generally when people are feeling good about working at Occam and they're feeling like, they're feeling valued basically, then that's a good measure of, okay, collaboration is probably going well, or people are, answering like, do you enjoy working with your team members? And if they put yes, that's definitely a good sign. And then the other thing that I like to look at is like the product results, or I should say actually like the OKRs. Are we meeting our OKRs? And how that also tells me that we're doing well, or that we're collaborating, is because if we are meeting our OKRs, there's a high chance that we have good like communication that's happening, and that's put in place, and that has resulted in us meeting our OKRs. And then the third thing is like, do we have processes defined, and are people like, do they know and understand what those processes are? So I feel like when those three things kind of are in place and they're at a good spot, so like your team health, team is good, you're meeting your OKRs, you're executing, making progress. And then the third is you have those processes defined where people can see what they are. Then I feel like, that gives me the understanding that things are going pretty good.
Yeah, I love that. Again, it's so obvious that your natural approach is a people first one, because I guess like the obvious answer, which I'm pleased you didn't kind of say, but like the obvious answer is like, how do you make sure your remote team is doing a good job? And people are like, well, results, like what do the results look like? Whereas, your instinct is to go towards, how are people feeling, ask them directly, like get feedback from your team. Don't just look at the work that they're doing, like think about actually what does their daily life look like, what's their attitude like, how's morale. And I guess with a global team that is fully remote, that is such a difficult thing to gauge, like you said. And yeah, I think that it's almost like I mean, you can't really overstate it, but it's almost like a really undervalued thing of like checking in on a personal level with a remote team is so important. And I think it kind of is like the makeup. It's the deal breaker for running a successful remote team. But it sounds like you're doing just a swell job. But
It's the progress, it's one of those things like that whole side of the house, like it's you have to be very regular, and it's not a snap, like right when you put in these things, like that's not going to make a difference. It's that consistency and over time,
Sure. That's segued me kind of perfectly into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, because I wanted to talk about trust. and building
Yeah.
trust. And like you're saying, that consistency, being patient with it, I guess is probably one of the main factors within building trust within a team. But is that something that you've thought about, and something that you try and actively do?
Absolutely. Trust is so interesting. One thing about Occam is that our one and only value is trust. And when I actually, before I joined Occam, like one of the things, when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, that's amazing. And I know there's a lot, like I feel like just that value, the word trust, there's so much packed into it. Like, you really have to like unpack it. But yeah, how do I measuring trust? Number one, like that's very, very difficult to do. But there's some things that, or like practices that I like to put in place to help gauge that and like, make sure that we're on the right, or we're building that trust. So the first thing, like I mentioned, like the team health surveys, those are really helpful for me to get that feedback and then also action on that feedback. And then one big thing, we all know like the one-on-ones that you mentioned. I feel like with every right now, the team and the company that I have, it enables me to like I can have one-on-ones with all of the engineering members at this point, and which is great. And that, just having that on a weekly basis is something that helps a lot. And one of the things in my one-on-ones that I always ask in almost every single one is, how's your morale? And, tell me on like a scale of 1 to 5, one being like, wow, things are not good. And 5 being, everything's amazing and we're awesome. So, and I asked them, and I feel like that's such a good question. It really helps me understand, okay, where they're at. And it's not only like, oh, okay, like they'll say like, okay, I'm at a 3 and then, that's it. Like, no, it's like, okay, what's going on? Like, tell me about, how you're feeling, or how can we move that 3 and how can we move it into a 5? And that really, like that type of stuff, like really helps to give me that understanding about, where folks are at, what's important to them as well. So that's one thing that I like to do. The other thing is being vulnerable. And that whole piece of like initiating trust, I feel like that comes from sharing and being transparent in your communication. So an example is like some of my team members, they'll actually ask me that back and they'll be like, okay, for you 1 to 5, like, how are you doing? And, and I'm totally honest. And sometimes like things are hard. So, like for example, recently, we're hiring at Ockam, and it's a lot of work. And there will be times when, like with a candidate, like you're almost at the end, you're about to close them, you're super excited, and and then they're like, oh no, they're deciding to go somewhere else, or whatever it is that they choose, or whatever's happening. And so that's kind of a bummer. And like, and I'm, I'll be very honest with my team members as to how things are going and kind of where I'm at and where my head is at. And I feel like that really helps, just that, mutual sharing. And again, like it needs to be consistent. And I feel like it takes like at least like 6 months, maybe a year to develop that, good, solid relationship. And where, you can also demonstrate, like another big aspect before I get into the demonstration part, but another thing is that is important to me is what I say is what I do, or and like kind of keeping my commitment. So for example, like if we're having a conversation and we're like we're talking about like promotions, so I like to be super transparent about okay, we have like a yearly cycle, in this particular upcoming one, I think there's a longer way to go for you to get to the promotion, so we have to aim for the next one. Okay, let's talk about what is that what are the next steps going to look like for you? What do you need to concentrate on? Having those like career conversations, and they're basically their career growth conversations. and I can talk about that for a long time, but I'm going to stop there. So just having those regularly is something super important to me. And then, like I said, like executing to whatever I say. Like if I say like, hey, you know, I'm going to keep in mind like some, you know, projects are you know, coming down the pipeline. I feel like you're going to be great as a project lead. So I make sure that, you know, they get that project lead. And of course, there's things that can happen, you know, just having that open conversation, like in case that is not going to happen or it's going to happen a little bit later. Yeah, so I feel like those are the main things that I keep in mind around trust.
I think you did actually as soon as you said it, I thought of a question that I was going to say when you sort of ask people about out of five how their morale's doing, but then you kind of
Yeah.
answered it straight away. And I was going to say, like, do you ever just kind of get, you know, threes and fours across the board if people are just kind of like neither here nor there, just kind of like cracking on and like kind of, you know, just getting through it and stuff, and then you obviously then you immediately said, you know, we're going to push that 3 to a 4 to a 5, we're going to get it up there, and that's your response. You're not just happy with someone who's fair.
Yeah, just meh. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, because I think it's easy to kind of fall into like a bit of a meh mindset, like especially with something that requires such deep focus.
Yeah.
And I think it's really admirable that you are so passionate about pushing people to get higher morale and be super enthusiastic about their work. And I love the vulnerability point as well. I think that's so important. It's something that's come up quite a bit, you know, be transparent, show vulnerability, don't be afraid to kind of, you know, take yourself down a peg and just
Yeah.
yeah, be open in front of your team. I think it is so valuable. And also understanding your team as individuals, like I think that kind of nicely brings me into my next question. But before I do sort of go into that, I just wanted to reflect on what you said, because I just think it is so true that, you know, really understanding each individual person, you make an effort to get that one-on-one time. You know, you don't seem like someone who they'll ever kind of be like, oh, I can't this week, or like I'm a little bit too busy this week. Like you can tell that you're obviously someone that really values that, and I think that alone is something that a team, like, it, regardless of if you hadn't said all the other stuff, that one part of you as a leader clearly is probably enough for, I think that would convince a team that you're obviously a really talented leader, because that would make them feel valued, like you said. And that's basically the most important thing for anyone at work, isn't it? So just to you know, I'm just going to use that word understand, because it's going to segue really nicely into the next part. I am curious to see what you've got to kind of say about navigating different dynamics and different cultures of a global team, especially remote, like we keep saying.
Yep.
That can't be an easy task at times. So just kind of talk me through that and your experience with that.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, I mean, you know, when I joined Ockam, you know, like, it is global and we have people from many different cultures. And actually before Ockam, the companies that I worked at, normally it was, you know, North America and, you know, a bit of like Europe, people from Europe that would be part of the teams, but this one was very different. So this definitely is something that is, you know, top of mind for me. And especially when I joined, I was like, huh, well, this is interesting. You know, we have, you know, and really different, and examples of that would be like, um, in a team meeting, you know, sometimes when something would go wrong or something like that, like it's very interesting, like people's reactions. Like some people would be like, you know, they'd be really open and they'd be like, oh my gosh, like, you know, what is this? You know, what happened? And not in a bad way, but, you know, in just a good way. But it was interesting, like just the differences. And some people are, you know, pretty stoic, and, you know, and other people are open and things like that. There's obviously a bit of personality differences there too. But I found that to be super interesting. So the way that I navigate that, and something that helps me out, to be honest, is not very different from what I do before. But I feel like exactly what you said is getting to know people as people, and through one-on-ones. I feel like that's like the best. That's like the best thing. And there's, you know, I think the just continuing that high communication on the team I feel like is really important. And, like I mentioned, like getting to know them in the one-on-ones and being curious about them, and asking normal questions that you would ask other people. I think there's also a piece sometimes where we over-index a little bit on like different cultures. And then, you're asking them about like, what is your culture like? And, you don't want to do like, it's a normal, I feel like it's just that piece of getting to know people, just as you would, um, anywhere else. And, through one-on-ones is the best. There's also, one of the things that at Occam, like I'm going to start doing, hopefully in like a month or two, is team building exercises. And I feel like those are also really fun for other people, for the whole team to get to know each other in an outside of just work, type of setting. This is going to be like a virtual offsite. So we're going to like do some like escape room type of stuff. But that also just helps people to understand one another and, and be okay with, okay, all right, this person, is just generally quiet, or that's just kind of what their personality or culture background also, where they come from. And that's totally fine. And whereas, somebody else might be, very open or something like that. The other aspect too, which is more of like the HR side of the house, is at Occam, we don't have any specific like public holidays where everybody, like the whole company is taking off, like, on something like Memorial Day. Like, in the US, we have Memorial Day, but we don't impose that on anybody else. So it's more like, okay, you have, there's a specific like amount of public holidays, you take off whatever you want. And, and obviously, so so that's something that is important. And here too, like I think recognizing or having that self-awareness, I feel like is really important here as well. And you know recognizing like when you might not know a lot about a culture, and maybe when you might want to have a conversation with somebody about it in like a good way, just to be curious and ask like, like, hey, I feel like this particular issue that came up, I know like in the meeting, you thought it was great, but maybe did you like think about it more, and maybe you changed your mind, like kind of what's going on, and stuff like that. And yeah. So
Yeah. I think it's wicked, like that kind of, you don't need to force anything.
yeah,
I think it's so easy with, it doesn't even solely apply to different cultures or talking about different cultures. I think if anything is kind of, if you feel like you're forcing it a bit, that is the first thing people see. You can't
yeah,
have it, that you're kind of trying to force a conversation. And I just think that's so important when it comes to cultures, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask, because I think I wanted to know how you approach those conversations, and obviously your answer basically being just whenever it feels right, and just act like, I feel like a point that you made earlier as well when you were talking about it is like, you don't kind of need to kind of like, either this, and I
yeah,
love that, because it's like, even if you are curious or you admire a particular culture or an aspect of someone's culture and you want to talk to them about it, it'll come up, like it'll naturally come up, and you can just discuss it
yeah,
one-on-one, human to human, like you said. You don't have to kind of tiptoe around it necessarily, and I think that especially as a leader, that isn't something you should feel like
yeah,
you have to do, too. And yeah, I just think it's a really interesting subject. And I kind of, I would love to go into more detail. I feel like that's an episode entirely in itself.
absolutely.
So I am tempted to kind of get you back on at some
Yeah,
point.
for sure. Yeah, yeah,
I find everything that you've said really interesting, and I think it's been a really, really, really insightful episode. I think you're in quite a unique position, and you're obviously so good at what you do, and it sounds like everything's going super well over at Occam. So I just have one more question for you to kind of round it off, and it's something that I ask everybody. And I know you've touched on a couple of points before, so feel free to repeat yourself. But I do just want to know what kind of advice do you have for any tech professionals that would like to be in your position?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question about the advice. And I was just thinking about it actually the other day, because there's so much advice, right? Like there's so much advice out there. And I was just thinking about like what has made the most impact for me. And for those who know me, they will probably know like the answer that I'm going to give. But the advice that I have is to get mentors and find a mentor or a coach that you like and admire. For me in my career, the effect of having mentors and having those conversations, being able to ask questions, being able to navigate leadership or certain situations, work through, things that goals that I have, being able to do that with someone else or like with someone else's opinion and advice and things like that makes a world of a difference. And I can't emphasize it enough, but just that, being able to find someone. And I feel like that also puts in a little bit of, if you have a goal in mind, like there's somebody else who's kind of like checking up on you, and you have that type of, you're progressing and you're going to the next, you're also getting, some transparent feedback from them, and that's growth. And I feel like that's something, that in my career has made a profound effect on me, or has had a profound effect on me, is the mentors that I've had. So
I
that's
love
my
that.
recommendation.
It is important, isn't it, to get someone else's kind of experience for free, and just you're essentially kind of like skipping a bunch of steps that people would have had to work through themselves. If you've got someone there to kind of guide you through it, it makes perfect sense. I think that's amazing advice. Honestly, Sabine, like I genuinely want to keep talking, but I'll definitely get back in touch with you and get you on again. I know we've got some roundtables that Sabine's been on as well with a couple of my colleagues. So I'll stick them in the links down below as well, because they are really, really fascinating. And yeah, honestly, thank you so much. It's been
Thank you.
such an insightful episode. There's a bunch of stuff out there on YouTube, but like I said, there's the book that I'll get from Sabine, and I'll put that link there as well. And yeah, I feel like there's so much to gain from this episode. And you can watch it on YouTube if you're listening on Spotify, and you can see the lovely gestures that have been made and the little wave at the beginning from Sabine. And if you're watching it on YouTube, you can obviously go and give us a follow on Spotify as well. You can hit the subscribe button. I don't know, it's there, I think, or it might be that one. I'm not actually, I always get it wrong. I can never remember it the right way around. You can also go and follow us on Insta, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Head over to our website, amicusjobs.com, for tech news, webinars, blogs, and keep up to date on everything Python, Golang, JavaScript, and machine learning from all over the globe. Sabine, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
If you're listening to this as a first episode, definitely listen out for Sabine's second episode, because I'm going to make it happen. It was such a good episode.
Thank you. It's been wonderful being here, and I love these questions. This is a great topic and awesome. I've had enjoyed.
It's been a pleasure.